Well, welcome. My name is Eric Friedman. I'm the Executive Director of the Mad River Valley Chamber of Commerce, and I welcome you to our legislative update, which is presented by the Mad River Chamber and our good friends at the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. Since the beginning of this pandemic, the Mad River Chamber has been working really closely with the legislative team at the Vermont Chamber, as well as the Lake Champlain Chamber. This collaboration has enabled us to rally support, influence our legislators, and achieve some positive outcomes that have had direct impact on many of our local businesses in an important time of need. Your participation is vital as we plan for the next session when many more critical decisions are going to be made, and that will have a direct impact on your business potentially. Your attendance here today, very, very much appreciated. Thank you so much for coming out. We appreciate that. As part of our ongoing collaboration with the Stowe Area Association and Revitalizing Waterbury, their members and legislators have also been invited to attend this meeting. And thank you so much again for showing your support and learning more about the issues at hand. Just so folks are aware, the Vermont Chamber focuses on economic growth through networking, advocacy, marketing, and education. We're joined today by Betsy Bishop, who is the president of the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. She has been the president since 2009. She's also on the member of the board of directors of the Vermont Futures Project. She served on the Vermont Economic Development Authority from 2010 to 2017. She's a member, this is interesting, of the Vermont Biosciences Alliance. I don't know what that is, but it sounds really important. She was the commissioner of Vermont Department of Economic Development, and she was also the deputy chief of staff under Jim Douglas from 2002 to 2008. And she's also joined by Amy Spear, who is the Vermont vice president of the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. She's the vice president of tourism for the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. She was also the executive director of the Stowe Area Association from 2016 to 19, and prior to that was the director of the Killington-Pico Area Association from 2013 to 16, and she also worked in the Office of Economic Development for the town of Killington. And as I learned earlier, she also worked for the New Bedford Whaling Museum, which you've never been there. Is a really, really cool place if you're ever down in Rhode Island way. We are also glad to have our legislators on hand today. Maxine Grad, our representative, is hopefully will be joining us a little bit later. I believe Carrie Dolan will be involved in this conversation as well as Heidi Schumann from Stowe. Ann Cummings is here, our state senator, our Washington County senator, and both Anthony Polina and Andrew Perchlek were also invited, but I don't think they are going to be able to attend today. But I promised them that I would record it. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And Betsy, I guess I'll turn it over to you.
Well, great. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it, Eric. And I saw that Carrie Simmons was on as well. So thank you all for sort of pulling together your team. I think the comment that we've heard most frequently since COVID started is we're in this together. And I would say as chamber organizations, we are definitely in this together. So I appreciate the working together aspect here. I think what we would like to do mostly is have a conversation with you today. So I will rely upon you folks to really ask questions, whether that's in the chat or Eric, if you've gotten questions in advance, or Carrie, we will do that. I think Amy and I will start with a couple of questions, a couple of topics first, and we'll sort of tick off a menu of items about what we expect to see in the legislative session. And certainly as we get into the questions, if things are better directed to the legislators that are on the call, we will certainly, I'm just warning them now, we might pull you in and include you and have you do some further commenting on that as well. But today is really to sort of talk about what businesses can expect. As Eric said, at the root of what the Vermont Chamber does is we work toward economic growth and a robust economy in all of our downtowns, in our villages and in our small communities. And saying robust economic growth right now is kind of difficult. That is our core mission, and we know that we're a long ways from that right now, but we believe that it will return, and we want to make sure that we're poised to be able to do that. So first and foremost, I just want to talk a little bit about what we anticipate in the legislative session coming up. Thinking about just, it seems quite a while ago now, but just a few short weeks ago, we had elections and Vermonters overwhelmingly voted for President Biden, Governor Scott, and Lieutenant Governor Gray. And I think that's interesting when you look at Vermont and look at the makeup of Vermont, that what does that say about us as Vermonters? That we're voting for leaders who we feel like can help us through all sorts of these issues, and especially in our COVID-focused pandemic times. Voters of Vermont also elected more Republicans to the House, not a lot more, just a handful more, but it's meaningful because in the past, the House Democrats have had what they call a supermajority, meaning that it's easier for them perhaps to gather their troops and override a governor's veto. And we saw that, right, in the last several years. We saw that in high profile issues where there was conflict. And so by the Republicans making some progress in Vermont, we saw modest change there. The voters of Vermont also defeated the Speaker of the House and the Progressive Leader of the House. And so those are some major changes in the upcoming legislative session that we all have to pay attention to. The question is, what does this mean, right? So does this mean a massive change? Likely not. But with all new leadership, a new Speaker of the House, a new President pro tem, a new Lieutenant Governor, but the same governor, the question is, will there be a new air of collaboration? And I think that for those of us who are used to working within the State House and now within the State House through YouTube and Zoom, I guess, but for many years, I've had the privilege of working in the most beautiful building in the state and working with some really talented leaders. And sometimes when conflict occurs, it's hard to get to collaboration on other issues. But I think that this could mean that we have sort of a new leadership team. We've seen some conflict between House and Senate, which I hope is a thing of the past. And we've seen some conflict between those bodies and the governor's office. So knowing that we're all going to sort of pull together in this time of the pandemic, I think everybody has really focused on that need to work together. And I think we saw a really good effort in what I hope is to come for the upcoming session yesterday. Yesterday, the Joint Fiscal Committee met. Senator Cummings, who is on the call here today, is the chair of that committee. And we saw sort of I would say, a kumbaya moment where there seemed to be some really good workings between the House, the Senate, and the governor's office on the last round of funding for business grants. There was a meeting of the minds, and there was some kudos handed out for the way that collaboration and negotiation was worked through. So that was just great news to hear, because we have so many big issues ahead of us. One other thing about the session environment before we get into specific issues that I just wanted to point out, and that is the question about, will the legislature be working remotely? That will be decided today in the Rules Committee. And the answer to that is likely yes. And so what does that mean? That means people are not gathering in the State House, which is what we're all not doing, is we're all not gathering. But then it makes it just that much more difficult to work on a whole host and a myriad of issues. There are 24 committees meeting on any given legislative day. They're meeting for hours and hours a day. And that kind of deliberation on multiple issues is always a hard juggle, even in good times. But having it being all done remotely just adds a level of complexity. So there is a thought. I've had the opportunity to talk to the Speaker of the House. I'm talking to the incoming pro tem later today about whether we will have an agenda focused solely on COVID issues. Having said that, it's hard to explain exactly what COVID-only issues are. I mean, some are really easy to understand, but there are other things that also need the attention. So I think while the majority of the focus will be COVID focused, I do think that there will be time and effort for other issues. And so the Vermont Chamber has a 4-person lobbying team. You see Amy Spear with us today that Eric introduced. Our Director of Government Affairs, Charles Martin, some of you have already met, and he would be with us today, but he's on paternity leave. He and his wife just had their first baby girl about 8 days ago. So we're letting him take some needed time before the session, but otherwise he would be here, and he's certainly part of our team. And then we also have Chris Kerrigan, who's part of our team, who works more on manufacturing specific issues, transportation issues, and international issues. So that's the team. If you ever need input, advice, have a thought that we should be doing, maybe we're doing something wrong that you want to redirect us, email us or give us a call. Certainly you can reach us by Googling, or certainly Eric has all of our contact information, so that's great. I'm going to talk about the business grant relief program and just understand that for us in the upcoming session, that is priority one. Some people might say it should be the only priority. And while that's true, there will be other issues going on, and we don't have the luxury of only doing one thing. We have to do many things. But continued business grant relief is our top priority, and it has been since March. I will be glad to go over any details about the existing program, if there's any input that you want to give about that. But mostly what I'm going to talk about is what to expect in the upcoming session. So far, about $330 million has been granted in business relief, which is a huge amount of money. Vermont state government is not set up for programming to give grant money to businesses. It's just not something we do in Vermont. So this has been all new, and really a huge amount of work has gone in by legislators and the governor's office to really figure out how to create these programs and get the money out the door quickly. And that happened in May. It happened again in September, and it continues to happen as we try to reach that 12/31 deadline and expend all the federal money. The state got $1.25 billion. To put that in context, our entire state budget is $6 billion. So it's an incredible amount of additional money that has come into Vermont. And, it's really, really needed. Of course, all that money was focused on March through September 30th. So there is, no additional funding right now for what we call Q4 or next year, Q1, Q2, or I'm actually starting to hear healthcare folks talk about the fall already, which is discouraging, but something that we have to pay attention to. So to the extent that we stay under these types of travel restrictions and gathering restrictions, businesses and employees will continue to suffer. And the only way to get through that, frankly, is through massive amounts injection of funds from the federal government to the states, and then having the states grant those to businesses and employees. And in essence, continuing what has been done for the last 9 months, continuing it for the next 9 months. So we're interested in the package that is being discussed and hopefully agreed upon by the end of the week. That's what our insiders at the federal level say is it won't happen before the weekend, because that's when the homework is due, and nobody hands in the homework before it's due. So we're looking for that. They're talking about some agreement around lots of issues, but a $908 billion effort. We hear about a lot of conflict at the federal level when you read the news and hear the headlines, but there's also a lot of agreement. And so the notion of cleaving off all of the areas of agreement around extra unemployment benefits and a $300 additional kicker for that, broadband funding, childcare funding, all of those things, that is, welcome news to us. Those things are not in disagreement. There's two things that are in disagreement at the federal level, and they are also moving toward agreement. And the reason I spend some time on these federal issues is because in order for us to get those business grants into your hands, into businesses' hands, we need the feds to act first. So that's what we're working on. And so one of those things is those two offset things at the federal level that are sort of working against each other is the House Democrats want a serious and substantial relief package to go to state and municipal governments. So that those budgets that have been devastated across the country can be refilled and so that they can be operated. We think that's pretty important when you look at the potential budget hole that we have in Vermont. Without federal help, there's no way that we can cover that. And the choices there of either taxing something or cutting something are really difficult choices to the tune that we would need to do that to have a balanced budget in Vermont. So that's one side. The other side is protections for businesses, liability shields. And I think what we've seen there is it started off as we want liability from anything for everything COVID related. That was, I guess, what they call the big ask. It sounds like that is coming down to a more bite-sized thing that everybody can accept, perhaps a liability shield for 12 months or 18 months or for the duration of the executive orders of governors. So those details aren't worked out, but what has been worked out is that there's a path to passage there as opposed to just gridlock. So I think that's good news. It can't come soon enough. We wish we could push that along further, and we're certainly talking to Senator Leahy and Congressman Welch about this. So they've been extremely helpful. Thinking more about Vermont focused and the business grant relief program, I think it will come under scrutiny this session as to the definition of unmet need. For any of you who filled out one of these grant applications, you probably have already become very familiar with the term unmet need, and you understand the calculations. Perhaps you've seen some benefits to your business for that, or more likely what I'm hearing is you've seen some things that are left out of that unmet need. We would love that feedback. So you can either drop that in the chat to us or email either Amy or I. We know that this conversation is coming about unmet need. Yesterday during the Joint Fiscal Committee, several of the legislators talked about how we do a better job of targeting business relief funds to the businesses that need it the most. We agree. They did a really good job last month when they targeted $75 million of sort of extra CARES Act funding to the hospitality industry specifically. We were extremely supportive of that. We like to see that. We think retail was left out of that. And I think that retail is something that people are looking at. Small downtown retail is what the focus is. So how do we focus those dollars? The problem, the flip side of focusing, is there's always somebody who's in need. So I think that there's going to be a pretty proactive discussion about unmet need, about targeting of funds. And we would really welcome your input of what worked well for you. Send us an email, drop in the chat something that says, yes, this worked really well, don't change this part, or hey, this didn't work and I was totally left out. One of those areas that people have identified already is new businesses. If you started a business in January or February of last year, you weren't eligible for grant funding. So that is certainly on our radar, but we would love your input to that. The other thing I would ask is, there's a sort of a concept going on that because we've injected $330 million into businesses in Vermont, There's a question of, are they whole now? The answer to that is an overwhelming no. The pain is continuing. The unmet need calculation does not cover everything. And even if it does, there's a $300,000 cap on that for certain businesses and the certain large businesses. So anything above that was not met. But also that calculation is only through September 30th. So your unmet needs started ticking again on October 1st. And then, the week before Thanksgiving, the governor came out with added restrictions, which we know, we have heard unequivocally that business really dropped off after that, so that there's even more pain than there was before September 30th. So that's why additional funding and continuing to build that bridge is super important. As another issue, if you're interested in talking about the PPP taxability or state funds taxability, I'm not going to spend time talking about that now. I would prefer to know that that's something that you care about and want to ask a question about. We'll pick that up in the Q&A if that's something you want to delve into for sure. I'm going to pause here on sort of the session overview and the #1 priority for business grants. And I'm going to ask Amy to jump in and talk more specifically about hospitality issues and what we can see for travel restrictions, lodging, and restaurant specific legislation.
Thank you, Betsy. So I'll start with, and I think everyone on this call is probably acutely aware of the restrictions that we're operating right now under, as particularly in the hospitality sector. With the elimination of the cross-state travel map, the 80 million people that live within a day's drive of Vermont no longer can travel here without quarantining prior as they come to Vermont. Something that was really devastating for the restaurant industry was the elimination of multi-household dining. That those two things really put those restrictions really depressed business levels, both at lodging properties and at restaurants, and they've been operating at depressed levels really since March. So really, to Betsy's point earlier, the hurt is continuing. And one thing that we've all learned from the start of this is that public health measures will be the priority for when things start to reopen again. So we're in this holding pattern at the moment as cases and deaths continue. We're not optimistic that things will change in the immediate future, but that's something that, between our advocacy team at the Vermont Chamber, we're continuing our conversations with the administration to make sure that there is an education around the hospitality industry and what's important. I think a great example of education of the hospitality industry that took place, it was a call that Kim Donahue was actually on. It was Betsy, myself, Kim, and then another lodging operator met with Dr. Kelso. I believe it was in August. It seems so long ago at this point, when it really wasn't that long ago, but really explaining how lodging properties operate, explaining that it's not a place to gather, it's overnight accommodations, it's a place to rest your head, it's not where you're going to have a lot of people in an unregulated setting. So I think that was a really critical turning point to getting that 100% occupancy. And while we are having these travel restrictions on cross-state travel right now, at least that 100% number hasn't gone away. Something else that's important to note here too is the lens of restaurants and hospitality in general in Vermont. We're at a benefit really because of the public health focus that the administration has had. Where in a lot of other states that we're in contact with, there's this push-pull of blame on the hospitality industry. And I think it was really clearly stated in the governor's press conference. I can't recall if it was immediately before Thanksgiving or after, where it was clearly stated that over 70% of the new cases in Vermont are coming from social gatherings, not from regulated settings like restaurants or lodging. So that says the hospitality industry, they're doing their part. They're being public health ambassadors. They're informing their guests. They're enforcing rules. So, that's a benefit. I always try to find a bright side to something as we go through there. So at least we don't have that, the lens of that negative lens that often happens between the administration and the industry. So I guess that's my glimmer of hope, although we are operating at really severely depressed levels. And then, just one item of clarification. I know there's been a lot of conversation on, well, what does the multi-household gathering language on the cross-state travel page mean? And while we know and acknowledge that needs to be updated, I have received confirmation that it doesn't apply to lodging properties. So it doesn't apply to like your rooms. You can have multiple households within a lodging property. That intent was really to regulate multi-household gatherings of Vermonters and non-Vermonters in condos and full house rentals. So that's really what the intent was there. So people are able to house in their lodging properties multiple households. So I know I certainly acknowledge that language provides a lot of ambiguity on the cross-state travel page, and there's some work that needs to be done on that. But the intent is not to restrict the number of households in the lodging property in your individual rooms. So I just want to put that out there before we go into there. And then going on to a specific issue that I know that's been really at the forefront for a number of years. And while we know our priority is on economic recovery grants for businesses, there are a few other hospitality related issues that are on our priority list. So one of those would be the regulation of short-term rentals. I think some people on this call have heard me talk about it already this week, but there's been a meeting of the minds between housing and licensed lodging properties in a way over the last 6 months. It's really starting to bubble up. So, the housing groups, as they have in the past, would like to pursue a rental housing registry, and the Vermont Chamber believes that a short-term rental registry would be the best place to start leveling the playing field between licensed lodging properties and short-term rentals. And on this front, we've begun conversations with our allies and with Senator Sorokin and Lyons, who have been champions of this in the past. The Vermont Chamber's continued stance on this, and which is shared by the lodging community, is that short-term rentals need to be treated like any other lodging property and regulated accordingly. And really, this pandemic has put a fine point on that issue, because it's a perfect example of what can happen in a public health crisis when unlicensed properties are providing overnight accommodations and they're remaining anonymous, and state officials don't have the mode to contact them because of that anonymity. So as everybody knows, these unlicensed, unregulated properties, they're really actually running small to medium-sized lodging businesses. And they're using the short-term rental sites like Airbnb and HomeAway to gain an unfair and significant competitive advantage over the licensed lodging properties. So there's no oversight to whether or not they're complying with public health and safety, or if they're actually submitting the rooms and meals taxes like they're supposed to. So there has been some positive movement on this issue. There's been a number of studies that have taken place. In May, Senate Economic Development received a report from Dartmouth College, and that report provided an analysis of the landscape, so the legislature could then develop and implement a system of both taxation and regulation. I won't go into any specific details on this report here, because I think it's common knowledge for those in the industry that while it is important to the tourism economy, it's also, creating housing shortages, it's creating an unfair advantage, and the regulation needs to be put into place. So I'm going to not go into too much detail there, because I want to have a dialogue with folks on that and not bore you with all the numbers that are in the study, but I could if you want me to, because I love data and diving into things. So I'd be happy to do that. But I'm going to shift for just a moment over to some restaurant legislative priorities. The Vermont Chamber, through our partnership with Vermont Independent Restaurants and also with Representative Byron from Virgens, we're working on a few liquor law modernization efforts. So both of the things that we're working to get introduced would provide regulatory and financial relief for the cost of doing business for those restaurants. So the three things that we're looking at for what we're calling liquor law modernization would be the establishment of wholesale pricing for third-class license holders. Those in the industry know that the everyday consumer has to pay the same price for a bottle of Bar Hill gin as a restaurant that's going to buy a bottle of Bar Hill gin. So that really creates a difficulty for pricing and margins for businesses. So that's one key issue there. Another issue would be to allow third-class license holders to purchase spirits from state liquor stores with a credit card. Currently, any license holder needs to purchase spirits in person with a check. So a consumer can go in and purchase alcohol with a credit card, but a business is not able to go in and purchase alcohol with a credit card currently, or spirits with a credit card. And then one thing that has been a shining light for restaurants during the pandemic are cocktails to go. It's currently tied to the executive order. The Department of Liquor and
I thought I could mute her. I can't mute her.
So the Department of Liquor and Lottery introduced some legislation to have some permanence to liquor to go, and that would be a sunset in a couple of years. And we're generally from the restaurant community, and I'd love to hear feedback from those on the call today, that there's generally a favor of having liquor to go, but with a sunset assigned to it. So I'd love to hear feedback from folks on that. I know there's some activity in the chat that we'll get to here. And then the last piece that's on here would, for the restaurant world, would be the regulation of third-party delivery apps to protect operators from inclusion without consent. So you'll find like DoorDash, Uber Eats, other third parties that will include restaurants without their knowledge or their consent. So that creates a multitude of problems, whether it's from a customer service perspective, from an operator perspective. There shouldn't be inclusion without consent. And there's movement on this issue outside of Vermont as well. I believe it was in September, California passed the Fair Food Delivery Act, which prohibits just that, no inclusion without consent. And then there's also movement at the national level, at the National Restaurant Association, working with those third-party delivery services on no inclusion without consent. So those are some of the really big, I guess, hospitality issues that we're working on, but want to pause there and see if there are any questions, or if Betsy, if you wanted to add anything to that.
I think that's good. I noticed in the chat that Kim Donahue mentioned that some of the folks are in the lodging industry are also having the same issue with third-party apps. So maybe that's something that we could delve into a little bit more with our lodging group and find out, maybe we can attach that to this and do that. I just need a thumbs up from you, Amy. Can you hear me and see me? Okay, great, because you're the only one I can see right now. And I can't really see the chat, so I'm going to ask you to manage that, or Eric manage that. For some reason, I've got a few technical difficulties.
Yeah, I've got that, Betsy. No worries.
Perfect. Thank you.
But thank you guys for giving that overview. I mean, I think it was very, very complete and eye-opening of kind of what's going on. One of the questions that I have, that I hear from a lot of people, is how important is business involvement in the process of legislation? And does letter writing and contacting legislators, is it valuable?
I think it's hugely valuable. So I have been lobbying for a very long time. I've been in government and been subject to input from individuals, and I've been out of government. And so I have a perspective about that. And one of the things about lobbying is that there are many strategies and many different tools. Much like you just wouldn't use the same tool to build a house, that you need many different tools. You need many different tools to accomplish it. So the idea of an action alert and everybody email every legislator right now is not a tool that I use on every issue or at every turn. There are many different ways to get at that. And so I know that there's a different philosophy for different folks. But I think that it is helpful to get that perspective, especially right now when legislators don't have the ability, like any of us, to sort of go out and gather and talk to groups of people. And it's a little bit more like this, or one-on-one. So being able to tell the story about how COVID has impacted your business is super important. One of the things I suggest is, so if you read an action alert, something that I've sent out, or Eric has sent out, or Carrie, or somebody like that, one of the suggestions I have, if you read it and have questions, do call us and follow up, because it's super important that your email is timely and right. So if you get the action alert today and you don't get to it for 3 or 4 days, lots of things have changed. And then your email might be, it might have missed a nuance there. So always check in with whoever sent it. And I think it is important. We're all willing to help you make sure that you understand the facts, get the facts right, get the latest and the up-to-date piece. So, but weighing in with your legislators, having a relationship with them before you actually need them. I think that's one of the great things about having the legislators on this call that you have. I know that Senator Cummings has been really willing to talk to a lot of businesses in central Vermont through this COVID thing. I'm sure your local legislators have as well. It's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Betsy. I mean, one of the things that I've really noticed throughout this whole the whole pandemic crisis has been how responsive our legislators have been. When I send out an email and reach out to them, I mean, I sent something out to Anne on Monday, and I think it was within an hour I heard from her, and the same with Carrie and with Maxine as well. While they might not be able to always attend meetings, they have been incredibly responsive. Anne, not to put you out, yeah, I was going to say, do you have an opinion on this issue, this question? I think I gotta ask you to unmute. Wait, hang on a second.
I got it.
All right.
I think it's very effective up to a point. Don't have people from Brattleboro email me because there's a point at which it just, especially if you're the sponsor of the bill, you're sending me something to tell me to vote for. And the other one is personal letters get a lot more attention than a form letter. You have no idea how many hundreds of emails we get. And it's just, you push a button and it says forward. I got a whole bunch of emails on stop the suspension of habeas corpus in New York City.
Yeah, I wanted to know where you stood on that.
Doesn't matter, I don't have any power. But somebody had pushed the button. So the wedding industry has been extremely effective because they have sent us individual letters. People from your industry have sent us individual letters telling us your individual story and concerns. That's very, very helpful. Form letters, not so much, but individual letters are very helpful. And we do try and respond, if possible.
Yeah, and one of the things I noticed, just listening to the Joint Financial Committee, which is really exciting stuff, Anne.
I know.
They literally discuss very specific, issues that are brought up, and I was really impressed with that. So, so I appreciate your input on that, Anne.
So I think, Eric, I'm just going to jump in here. I think what Senator Cummings said is absolutely true. And, as a lobbying tactic, the Vermont Chamber does not have a form letter generator. We don't have that. And the main reason we don't is sort of what Anne just talked about is there's no national app or platform or web tool that has been designed for Vermont that actually works, because we have not everybody in Vermont is elected by zip code, and that's how they do that. They don't realize, in Vermont, many towns share a zip code, but we don't share necessarily a house member. And so they can't tease that out. So if you try to use one of those form letter generators, you end up sending a Vermont legislator a New York issue, just like she said. So we just don't do that. When I mentioned tools other than, the mass thing that says, email your legislator now. The other tool that we find quite effective is to make sure that we line up businesses in a legislator's district so that there is that key touch, because I think there's a lot of well-meaning businesses that see that and then just say, I'm going to email the whole committee, whoever they are. And I think Senator Cummings put a fine point on that. Yes, well, if they're from Brattleboro and I've got 1,000 emails to go through, I'm going to spend less time on the Brattleboro one. So it's much better if it's focused on the constituent business to the legislator that represents them.
One of the questions we had, Jean Frank, who owns the Mad River Lodge and the Warren Lodge, asked, is there any talks of retroactively calculating unmet need for businesses that started in January of 2020? In other words, not only changing the calculation from October 1st going forward.
No. And the reason is that all the money that came from the CARES Act has been expended or will be in the matter of a couple of weeks. And so there's no opportunity to recalculate for the March through September period. Plus, even where the March through September, there wasn't enough money to go around. For people in the non-hospitality businesses, they will see about 41% of their unmet need be met because of the additional actions from yesterday's meeting. Having said that, though, I do think that this is an issue that legislators have heard quite a bit about and are interested in fixing going forward. So retroactively, unlikely. Going forward from September 30th, likely.
And as a follow-up, one of the questions that I know that she's not on the call, but I've heard from her before, is that people that have purchased existing businesses have not been able to use previous owners' taxes to calculate the unmet need. Is that also not going to change?
They should be able to. I have heard of one very strange instance where the previous owner's not being helpful. But it's my understanding that you should be able to use the business's tax returns. The problem comes in depending on how you're set up as a corporation, if you're an LLC or a sole proprietor, or depending on that, then it's integrated with your personal tax return. So there are some nuances in tax law that could do that. But that's an interesting question that I think I will put down as one of the takeaways from this call is, to learn a little bit more about that and see if there's something as we're looking at new formulas, if we can address that.
Excellent.
Eric, can I step in here for a second? Because I do know that you were able to do that for most of the businesses. You had to do it through the ACCD though, and not my tax. And that got a lot of people confused, but most people got it clarified. It doesn't mean there's not extreme situations that, Betsy was talking about, but it has worked out for most, and I can attest to that.
Yep. Kim Donahue, I think this is more of a statement, was businesses left out of the grant program included hospitality adjacent businesses without whom many of them couldn't take care of their guests. Many of the wedding venues, for example, like wedding vendors like florists, entertainers, photographers, things like that. Is there any hope on the horizon for those folks?
I guess I'd like a clarifying question from Kim. My understanding is they weren't left out. However, the additional $75 million vote last month redirected funds to only additional funds to those in hospitality with 72 NAICS codes, which did not include the ones that she's just mentioning. But those people weren't not included in funding. They just weren't included in the extra bump. So that's my understanding. Kim, was there something else that maybe I should be aware of?
No, actually, that's correct. The only issue is that they do have a hospitality code. So when the governor refers to hospitality businesses, they actually do have hospitality codes, and it was just a little misleading for them. So there were some they felt we all felt there were some confirmations made to them that were not followed through on. Although they are very grateful to have the 41% or 40, whatever it is, as all
Whatever it is.
are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the deliberation was the 75 million. How do we target it? And if you don't target it, then those people can't, it was hospitality businesses, but to be fair, we should all be saying the food and accommodations businesses, because that's what 72 NAICS code is. It's food and accommodations. It is not hospitality at a greater piece. So that's correct.
Excellent. Another question. Oh, I'm sorry. Kim, did you have a follow-up?
No, thank you.
Oh, okay. One of the number one questions that I've been getting here down at the chamber office, outside of can I use your bathroom, is that a lot of the lodging establishments have received their grant funding, and I'm hearing from other folks wondering, when that they're expecting it to by the end of the year, or supposedly the middle of the month. Do you have any updates on the status of that situation?
Sure. Commissioner Goldstein said yesterday that checks would be cut today. Thursday. That's tomorrow. Would be cut Thursday, and that's for the first. What we would say is the hospitality, the 72 NAICS codes. I think on the other folks, there's this new calculation that additional money was added just yesterday. And so I think they're, reviewing that unmet need and making sure that the right amount goes out, figuring out how much the new amount can spread over all the other businesses that are not in the 72 NAICS codes. But my understanding is momentarily the money's got to go out pretty quickly here. And the unique thing about the business relief program, the allocation there, is that once the check is sent, it's spent. And that's because all of you businesses have already proven your unmet need through the application process. Whereas some of the other programs that were funded by the government in, let's just say in May, they had until 12/31 to expend that. So if it was, retrofitting a housing or if it was purchasing healthcare needs or those kinds of things, those are expenditures that had to be made. The business grant program, the beauty of it is that the unmet need's already been proven and that this check is filling that unmet need.
Excellent. Does anyone else have any other questions for Betsy or Amy or our legislators that are on the call?
We would be glad to talk about a 9% property tax increase, unemployment insurance, Act 250. These are other issues outside of the business grant relief program. If any of those issues are of interest, and, open for whatever you're interested in.
All right. Well, please, folks, be aware that if you ever have any questions in regard to legislative issues, please let me know. Like I said, the folks at Vermont Chamber are, ridiculously responsive, as well as are our legislators, as I mentioned earlier. So, please don't hesitate to reach out. I mean, that's what the chamber is here for. And use your, we try to disseminate this information to the various sectors also via like our lodging group or our restaurant group or our retailers group. And we're trying to be more specific with things outside of just being, to our membership generally. So please utilize those resources. Really encourage you to do that. So I'd like to thank Betsy and Amy for coming today. Really do appreciate it. And for Ann and our other legislators who I believe are on the line, thank you so much for, again, your responsiveness over this whole crisis and before. It really has been an eye-opening thing for me. I've gotten quite a civics lesson over the last 9 months. And I thought I knew my civics, and I've learned a lot about how it works, and also the advantages of of a small state like Vermont and how I think we work better than a lot of places. And there's not a lot of politics involved in it. I think people, for the most part, are really trying to do the right thing for the most amount of people, which is really heartening because you see in the broader world that is not always the case. So we're appreciative of that. But thank you so much for everyone for attending. Really appreciate it. And we'll do this again sometime real soon.
Okay, thank you very much for having us.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Take care, folks.